Welcome to the Business of Story, sponsored by Wix e-commerce, the professional platform that enables entrepreneurs just like you from around the world to create and run your own online store and grow your e-commerce business. Hi, I'm Park Howell, your curious host, who is going to unearth what in heck is meant by a brain story and how you can tap into its power from a storytelling pro whose career has taken her from branding to copywriting to neuroscience.
A lot of it is just bringing to the surface what people aren't aware of. What is the language you're using right now? How are you talking about yourself? When you say things like, I'll never fill in the blank, or I can't, you're creating a narrative that something is impossible, as a very simple example.
Brain and story coach Jocelyn Brady is a writer, edutainer, and professional brain jostler who thrives at the intersection of comedy, storytelling, and unraveling the mysteries of the human brain. When she's not being the Bill Nye of the brain, as the creator and host of Tiny Tips for Your Brain on YouTube, Jocelyn applies her certified brain coaching chops to help creative visionaries tap into their brain's greatest potential. In her past life as an award-winning copywriter, creative director, and agency CEO, Jocelyn led narrative strategy and international storytelling training for some of the world's biggest brands. She also produced and co-hosted Party Time, a stand-up comedy and storytelling show featuring talent who went on to write or perform for Conan, Colbert, and Comedy Central, all while managing to keep her 2 cats and houseplants alive, supposedly. Jocelyn's first book, tentatively titled Your Brain is a Magical Asshat, is slated for publication next year. But today, you'll learn how to turn your brain stories into gold using Jocelyn's 5-part story framework, using the acronym STORY as your guide. You'll learn the importance of play in your work and storytelling and why she considers the brain that magical asshat and how you can put that asshat to work for you. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Jocelyn Brady. Jocelyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. I've had a lot of fun watching your Tiny Tips for Your Brain video series on YouTube.
Thanks for watching.
How'd that come about?
It came about, I had a kernel of an idea in my head that I just sat down and thought, I love stuff about the brain, and had this notion about brain stories, the stories we're telling ourselves. And I love words, I love language, and I love comedy and short videos. So how can I bring all of this together? And I literally just sat at my computer, and I had no idea. I've never made my own video. For that first one, I just sat down and thought, hey, I'm just going to record something, put it out there today. And that's how it started. I've never beaten that same time record. As you can probably tell now, I get pretty wild with them.
Well, I was going to say the editing of them are quite intense. And when I was watching them, they were very fun. I love your energy and your comedy that comes through, your facial expressions. But you must have 1,000 edits in each one of those.
It's insane. Yeah, I've been teaching myself editing as I go through it. And I realize that what catches my attention is sort of a mirror of how my own brain works. Look over here, but this is interesting too. Woo! And thinking of all these, pop culture references and songs that pop in my head. So I thought I should make something that would at least entertain myself.
Well, they are very entertaining. And how many do you have in the hopper now that people can go and watch?
I think it's now 21 or 22.
How long have they been around?
I started December of 2020.
Yeah, because they are intense and they're really fun. I really highly recommend any of our listeners to go and check out the Tiny Tips for Your Brain. And that's going to bring us into today's discussion, because you and I have something in common in that early in our careers, we both have done a ton of work in brand development, brand storytelling. And while that was a very fulfilling career, it sounds like in reading your backstory that you found story and really the mechanics of story in our brain even more interesting. and why does it work? And so here you are today on the Business of Story to talk about that. So can you give us a little bit of your backstory, and then let's jump into this idea of brain stories and what the hell are they?
Yeah, I've always loved language, story. I grew up with a father who told stories in all mediums. He was a playwright, a poet, a musician, and and grew up in Hawaii, which has a very story-rich culture. So I was sort of bathed in that as a child. And I started my career out. Basically, I thought, well, maybe I can do copywriting. That sounds interesting. And again, started not knowing anything. I had no idea what I was doing. Just, can I make enough to eat a sandwich, pay the rent? And it kind of exploded. And I developed a team, and we started going from copywriting to developing the brand narratives and brand voice of these big multi-billion-dollar brands. And that led into training. One day, one of the CMOs said, "Can you come and train the team on how to be better storytellers and writers?" And as I was doing that, and by the way, when I started training, I was terrified. I was so scared of public speaking and using my own voice in front of people. I was much more comfortable behind the screen and putting the words into other people's mouths, as it were. And I fell in love. And I thought, this is it. Watching how people light up, watching how they're connecting, how they tap their own strengths and do things they didn't even realize they could do. That spark you see when they are surprised that, wow, I wrote a cool sentence. I told a really good story. And then how they're communicating with each other and the effect that has on the entire culture and business itself. So that's what got me more and more interested in what's going on with people's brains and how the stories we're telling each other and ourselves influences everything.
Well, you have a very funny way of writing, very engaging. Are you a comedian by trait, or is that something that you've kind of grown into?
I've grown into it. I've always loved and admired comedians. I did run a stand-up comedy and storytelling show as a host and producer, but did not do stand-up myself. Kudos to stand-up comedians. I think they have some of the hardest one of the hardest jobs in the world, because they're going out night after night after night, facing rejection, booze, or silence, which might be worse, and harnessing their craft. But it really takes that dedication and late nights and a very different schedule. So I thought, well, maybe I can kind of bridge that world by showcasing them and giving them a space and a little bit of, learning by osmosis, I guess. And I did take a few years, 4 years of improv.
And you've got this process called the story process, of all things. Can you quickly walk us through that and how you have used it to help your brands and your customers and clients become better storytellers?
Yeah, so all these storytelling frameworks, and by the way, I used to bring yours in. It's wonderful, phenomenal, 5 stars. And
Well,
I thought,
thank you.
what can I give? Yeah, it's great, it really. And doing these workshops, a lot of inspiration. I got a lot of inspiration from you, so I thank you. But I thought, what if we had a way to teach people how to tell a story using the word story? And I was like, that must exist. I couldn't find anything anywhere. So, Donald Miller has a really great, I think it's a 7-point framework. So it turns out, well, it's really difficult to come up with how that acronym can work. So after some testing and trying and, going through it, banging your head against the wall as you do when you're writing and creating something, it popped. It's just STORY: setup, twist, obstacle, resolution. Yay, you learned something. And then in each of those little modules, there's little exercises and tidbits. Like in your setup, you're learning the context and character and what they want, and the twist that comes and sets them on the mission. So I thought that was just a really good way to help people. If you can remember the word story, you can learn to tell one well.
Now, it's a beautiful acronym. And I'm wondering, in your training, because I found it in mine, that so you and I, and pretty much everyone that comes on the shows, we are like the story nerds. We love to study everything about the framework of it. And Joseph Campbell, the story cycle system story. I've been through Donald Miller's program and so forth. But I found that even something as simple as a 5-step process is really difficult for most people. That it seems like 10% of the crowd gets it, and they say, "Oh, I really understand this story thing now." If I walk through your, setup, twist, obstacles, resolution, and yay, which I love. I just think it's a great way to make it approachable and embraceable. But have you found it's still difficult for the vast majority of business people to get their heads around story?
Yeah, I think, and it comes, sometimes people have a hard time thinking, well, how does this apply in my day-to-day work? It can be a little easier when you're talking about something that's more one-to-one, like how do you tell a customer story, right? That's pretty, okay, you have a character and they came at the conflict and then some kind of resolution. But yeah, it takes some amount of, it's just like how our brains work, right? Neurons that fire together, wire together. So you just have to practice and do things over and over and over, and then things start to click, and you get better at it, like any skill, the more you practice. But yes, it can be really tough for people. I think now we have some good fortune in that a lot of, probably most, maybe every business now understands the significance and importance of telling a good story, of being a good storyteller. As storytellers rule the world, but that doesn't mean, once you're aware of something, it doesn't mean you know how to do it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've heard this from teams that I've been training, and teams I've really gotten to know, training for a long time. People will start pushing back even on the term story. Like, I'm not a storyteller. I don't have a good story to tell. I don't even really know what a story is. And so I like to take them to a moment and just say, take us to a moment in time when something happened that illustrates the point you were trying to make. And I have found that is actually kind of the entryway drug into understanding more about story structure and how to do it. If you can just get them to that one moment.
Yeah, it's like, what's that? What's something that even happened in the last week that caught your attention? You were totally enraptured by that moment. There's a story there, right? Because something changed. You were moved, you were changed. So there, if you can find that moment, you have a story. And to those who say they're not storytellers, bollocks. Everybody, you're a human being. So therefore, you are a storyteller. You process the world through story, and you relate through story. You make friends through story. It's how you make sense and meaning and find purpose. Everything is story.
I wish I had a bell I could ring right here, because after 340 some episodes, you are the first to use the term bullocks. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You should win some sort of award or something, Jocelyn. Thank you for that. So, okay, let me put you to the test. Take us to a moment recently in your life and share a story that's going to make a business point around whatever business point you would like to make using this framework.
Let's see. Oh, using my own framework. Yes, good challenge. I often go back to things that have happened in my childhood. It's kind of my go-to, because those are such poignant stories. But a really good one is what happened during COVID. How it started. Setup. Here I am. I am training teams. I'm running a successful storytelling narrative consultancy. Things are going well. But I have this feeling that something isn't quite right, and I need to take a new direction, but I'm a bit scared to make a change. So then COVID, the world erupts. Everything changes. All of my contracts vanish just like that. 12, 13 years of running this thing, and it's gone. So I have to make a decision, and I decide, you know what? I've always loved brain stories. I've been afraid to call myself a brain coach, even though I went through training, Neuro Leadership Institute, to learn how to do this. And I decided I'm going to come out and say this. I'm going to make the tiny tips. And it was so hard and scary And it was, a year of slogging through, of figuring things out, of trying things, of for the first time marketing myself after telling everyone else how to do it, and putting myself out there and on LinkedIn and social media, and owning my stake. And so that worked out. I rebranded. I came out. I said these. I started this video series. I started getting on podcasts, putting myself out there, pitching, more speaking, and as a result of all of that, I realized that, that the yay, I'm doing it, and I found this thing that lights me up like nothing else. And you just have to, it's like your last guest, right, mentioned, you just have to start. And sometimes it takes an eruption to force that, unfortunately, for some of us, even those of us who espouse just starting. Sometimes you need a little shove. So that would be, right, the STORY, the setup, me being this person who's doing a brand consultancy, the twist and erupt of the COVID happens, obstacle, I'm struggling to figure this out, resolution, I figured it out, I'm putting things out there, yay, I've learned that I can reskin.
You fascinate me because in watching your Tiny Tips video, you come across energetic, all the power, the confidence. You do not come across as someone who's trying something new for the first time and hoping with fingers crossed that it's going to work. And so kudos to you, because I think that's what holds so many of us back, right? I'm afraid of looking dumb or foolish or whatever, but it sounds like you really followed your passion with this. And you had the off-ramp and the on-ramp of storytelling. You've been doing the branding work. You knew how to brand, obviously you know how to coach and teach story, and you have this comedic side that's really wonderful. So I'm surprised to hear that you had such trepidation going into that, because they come across so well. You come across so well in those videos.
Thank you so much. I thought, how do I play with this? Play is one of my central pillars. And how do I turn this scary thing into something fun and be vulnerable and just try stuff? And I think that you have to learn how to play with your thoughts, play with your experience, and you'll find more joy and flow in that process.
So brain stories. It sounds to me like you were telling yourself one story internally in your setup that, this seems to be working, but something internally is telling me I've got to do something else. And then you had the twist, of course, and you jumped after it, but you also were then telling yourself brain stories of, gee, I'm not sure if I can pull this off. I'm a little bit nervous about this, and then you dive into it. So let's focus on brain stories. How do you actually define brain stories?
The stories we tell ourselves. That's the crux of it. Is as simple as that. What are the stories that are happening in your brain? Because you're making things up and writing it down internally. And that is framing how you see the world, how you perceive, how you move and focus and interact. So the brain stories, I often call them the BS. Flip the script on your BS, shapes your potential.
All right. So as a brander, you and I are in the world of being able to paint these beautiful stories and images and feelings and emotion around an inanimate object, typically, and or a product or a service. But what you're doing is diving much deeper into trying to understand the mechanics of how that actually works, both on the recipient's brain in that story, as well as the creator's brain. Do I have that right? And what was it that triggered you to do that?
I think when I look back, there's so many moments that have led up to this. When my dad had a stroke, that was a big trigger. It was not the complete turning point, obviously. So I didn't come out and do this until really COVID. I was doing it in secret before that. But in my early 20s, my dad had a stroke, and he lost his ability to speak. And this is the early 2000s. Now, at this point, neuroplasticity is a relatively new and shaky term when it comes to adult brain cognition and how the brain works. A lot of people laughed at it. You weren't really allowed to say that adults had neuroplasticity. But it was also this same time, the Dalai Lama had come out and said, if the brain can change the mind, can the mind change the brain? And he was laughed at for this, but it turns out it's true. And I saw it firsthand with my dad, who decided he was going to learn how to speak again. And now it's not as simple as that, but he had luck in some circumstances. He was within what's called the golden window, just about. He's on the cusp. When you have a stroke, you have a few hours where you can recover. And he would picture an apple and say, until he could say apple, until he could converse again. And now he's back to telling dad jokes and not finishing the ends of stories that I really want to know the ends of. He says, I'll tell you when you're older. Well, I'm pushing 40. So that was one big trigger, again, retrospectively.
Have you by chance listened to my show of about a month ago with Sean Enton? It's show number 337. Sean had a stroke when he was 39 years old. He was an absolute go-getter entrepreneur in Southern California, living the high life, and then was got in a chokehold in doing some jiu-jitsu training and severed his carotid artery, and he had a stroke, and they told him he would never walk, talk, do anything again. And to your point, he said, no, that's not me. I am going to use the power of my brain story to overcome that. And he has just a marvelous story. And I had him on the show. He started a website called Strokehackercom to work with people that have had strokes that said, look, so much of this is in your brain, in your head, and you can overcome it, just like you were talking about right there. Given your background and your experience with your dad, you might find it really interesting. But I find that really fascinating, that what happened with you and your dad. It sounds like he's doing much better now.
Yeah, for full recovery with it, as far as ability to speak, and it was terrifying. Not hearing him on the phone for that first time. He couldn't articulate, and I put myself on mute so he wouldn't hear me freak out. And to see that complete 180, it's that really changed my brain. Right? It's like, wow, if that's possible for somebody who had physical damage that a lot of people said you can't reverse, you can't change, you can't recover, what's possible for the rest of us?
So what did you do next?
Well, again, that was in my early 20s. And then I had gotten into copywriting. I started my business Scribe in 2008, I think it was. And it's sort of running under the surface, this fascination with brains and brain stories. And meantime, I'm also getting my MFA in creative nonfiction writing. So still like really dedicated to the craft of language and story. And it crept in more and more. As I said, I was doing more training and watching how people told stories in business settings. A lot of the no, or the undercurrent of no, that is not possible. You cannot do that. Legal will never allow it. We're very familiar. It's like, what is that doing to people when it's just an instant no, or even an attitude of no, even if you're not directly saying those words? And I wanted to play with that more. So the more storytelling training I was doing, the more neuroscience I started to sneak in there and, showing pictures of brains and having people do little brain exercises with their fists and just making it a little more visceral. Because I thought, what is more important? Yes, of course, you have quotas and profitability and stakeholders and et cetera, et cetera. You're in marketing, you're in business. You need to hit these marks. But what is happening if your team is not gelling and supporting each other and elevating the narrative within? You're never going to believe the stories you tell or have passion around them. And they are so intertwined, the individual success with the collective and your brand and your business.
So when you are working with people now and telling their stories, do you bring a different kind of training to that, where you are making it more visceral? Or how are you interweaving what you've learned in the brain story side of it with your storytelling mechanics, such as, your framework called story.
Yeah, in one-on-one coaching, so I'm doing more, workshops and speaking and one-on-one coaching. And with the one-on-one coaching, it's brain coaching. A lot of it is just bringing to the surface what people aren't aware of. What is the language you're using right now? How are you talking about yourself? When you say things like, I'll never fill in the blank, or I can't, you're creating a narrative that something is impossible, as a very simple example. Or use myself as an example, being very nervous about whether it's rebranding myself or starting to speak in public, when I thought I could never do that. I would get sick. Literally, I would get sick speaking in public. I gave myself hemorrhoids. My stories were a little pain in the arse. So it's, how do you reframe that narrative? But first, you need to be able to see it clearly. Like, wow, I'm telling myself I'm not good enough. I have nothing of value to say. People aren't going to like me, all those sorts of things. And once you can see them, now you have the power to go, well, that's not doing me any service. How can I flip the script on that? How can I learn to tell that in a new way and then follow suit? Your behavior will align to the fundamental beliefs, which align to the stories.
Do you have, like your story framework, do you have other framework or steps people can go through to help them identify those brain stories they're telling themselves that are not in service to them, and how they can reframe those stories or retell those stories to themselves?
Well, I do have a really simple free online tool at betterbrainstories.com. And I wanted to make it fun, so you'll see that my personality coming out on that page, and it's just a simple way for you to start with something that's like driving you crazy, that you wish you could change and you feel like you can't, and walking through that just to start seeing how that's possible. Now,
Give
that's
us a little
again
taste of that, will you?
Yes. I mean, if could I practice on you?
Please. I
Do
hope.
you?
Maybe. I
Yeah.
don't know. No,
Let's
I'm out of
see.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there something right now that is driving you crazy, that you feel is impossible, that you can't do?
Driving me crazy, feels impossible, something I can't do. Not really. I know there's got to be something, so now I'm deflecting, right?
Or maybe it's when you started the podcast, or some of the stories you were telling yourself, about how hard it will be, or I need all the right equipment, or
No, my wife, Michelle, God bless her. We've been married for almost 35 years, and she just calls me a bull in a china shop, of course, because I just kind of go, I'm all in. And then, I figure out all the places I'm spinning my wheels. And so I'm not one that's ever been real reluctant to try new things. But your question is a good one. Is there something? And after all these years, I've been through so many things. So let's think about that. Okay, let's do this. I am reluctant to do videos like you do online. Everyone asks me, Park, why don't you do Business of Story as a video podcast as well as an audio podcast? My argument to myself is I've always loved theater of the mind, and there's something about being able to hear someone's voice and taking them down the road and hearing their stories that enables the listener to really picture it and feel it for themselves. And I've been reluctant to make that video. That's one of my excuses why I don't want to do it. The other thing is I'm just not sure that I come off that well on camera. And then I look at your tiny tips videos for your brain and look at the amount of editing that goes into that. And I love them because they're so engaging. But I'm like, I would love to do that for Business of Story, but I fear I'm not going to put in the time it takes to really pull that off as well as you do. So let's go with that. I'm just not open to bringing Business of Story into the video world yet.
So this is actually really interesting. You're very good at using language on yourself, because you noted, or I'd like people to notice that you added that word yet. That is one of the most powerful, and Carol Dweck talks about this, right? Like growth mindset, adding that yet already plants a seed that maybe something is possible. However, if we bring it down to a very basic stoppage, I don't think I can do the types of videos I would like to do. Maybe that could be it.
Mm-hmm. I think
Okay.
that's fair.
All right. What evidence do you have to believe that? Why do you think that's true?
Because I know the amount of time and effort it takes, having produced tons of corporate videos over my long career. I'm quite a bit older than you are by about 2 decades. You had said you're arriving at your 40s. And I don't know that I've got the energy to put in that amount of time and the interest, I guess, quite honestly, to create those kinds of videos.
So, what is the worst thing about not having enough time? What does it say about you that you believe you don't have enough time?
That I'm probably squandering time or energy and time on things that I shouldn't be focused on, and probably need to get a little bit more clear on where I really want to place my energies.
So, I'm not clear on my energy, maybe.
Yeah, potentially.
So that might be an example of I'm not we could say it a lot of different ways, right? Like I'm squandering my time, I'm not spending my energy well, I'm not clear about the best places to spend my energy. And that right there could be a core brain story. BS.
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting to that place where you're saying you're owning it, right? And it could be very uncomfortable. Might not be something you want to believe. That's usually if you feel a little bit of that, like, oh, I don't know about that, you're usually getting pretty close. So now, if you look at, I mean, the reframing, we would also dig into the feelings that brings up. So, what is something like I'm not spending my energy well? What is that feeling? What feeling does that bring up?
Okay, so the word, as you were talking right there, popped up in my mind is priority. I'm at a different stage in my life. You know, I built an agency. I ran one for 20 years in Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona. Takes a lot of energy. I've done the 60 and 80-hour work weeks. I don't need to do that anymore. So, like yesterday, I worked in the morning. I put in 3.5, 4 hours, incredibly productive. And then I got to go skiing up at Snowbowl in northern Arizona for 5 hours. And I had a marvelous day. Both the business was successful in the 3.5 hours I put into it. And then my outdoor, energy, skiing, being in the mountains was successful. So when I look at it, it's not that I'm spending or spinning my wheels and energy in the wrong places. It's like, what is truly my priority? Spending those 5 or 6 hours trying to create a really good YouTube video, or being in the mountains where I can be doing the skiing or hiking or playing golf, because I'm still very much working and I love it, but I am really trying to work the 30 to 40 hours a week versus the 60 to 80 hours a week.
So to me, it sounds like this isn't really a problem, right? Like
Yeah.
you imagine that creating videos might not be something you really want because you do feel fulfilled. You do feel like you're spending your energy well. But for the sake of an exercise, it could be looking at if I'm not prioritizing my time well, that could make me feel, anxious or trapped, right? And then you just start looking at simply looking at the opposites of this. It's like so simple to just literally rephrase it as the antithesis of that. So from I am not spending my time well to I am spending my time well. All right. So then what does someone who spends their time well believe about the world and themselves? How do they feel?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I'm doing it right, and like when I went to bed last night, I felt great because I felt like there was balance in my life. I wasn't killing myself on my business, and I didn't kill myself on the mountain. But it was just this great balance between work and fun and pleasure. Seth Godin, I read something on Monday, I guess, one of his quick little quippy newsletter bites. And he said, don't ever discount the power of a hobby. And he was kind of saying that people maybe don't you really invest in the hobbies like they should, that they feel like they got to work. But he said just the amount of, personal gain that you get from a side hobby or a side hustle, and actually how people do benefit from it, that I've always thought that, but it was really nice to see him say it again, because it really reminded me about the power of hobby and that story we tell ourselves. So I like to play the piano too. And I get away from sitting down and playing the piano because I feel like I've got to write a blog post or get ready for my next podcast. And it's these stories I tell myself about running the business of story. When I sit down and I play that little Mozart piece that he wrote when he was 6 years old, and I marvel at the brilliance, I do find how I can use some of that then in my own work, in these kinds of discussions. And so that hobby of playing the piano does pay off. Where I am totally going with this, I have no idea. Jocelyn, you have started 9 different brain stories in my head right now.
It feels like a tiny tip. But I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something I think so many of us forget how important. I'm reading this great book right now. It is called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. And he also wrote a book called The Antidote. What is it? The Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking.
Oh, right. I read that about 10 years ago when it first came out. That is a fabulous book. I've not heard of his latest one. Tell us about that.
Oh, it's so good. It's basically, it's resonating a lot for me. First of all, I like to talk about deathbed you a lot. If you think about deathbed you, what are they most proud of, right? What do they most want for you? And what would they be the most horrified or sad that you never tried and never pursued? That can be a very clarifying exercise. So in this Time Management for Mortals, or 4,000 Weeks book, he basically opens with that premise that, let's face it, we're all going to die. So we have about 4,000 weeks if we live to the average age of 80 something. And for some of us that were over 50% or close, or, we don't, what is that? 2,000 weeks. That's nothing. So we can never do all of the things. And we have to accept that the best way to deal with that is just to accept that we can't do all the things. It's finite. And we might as well choose the most important, the most fulfilling. And sometimes those things don't need to have quote unquote purpose. They simply give you joy. They're the things that deathbed you would be the most proud of. And maybe that is going skiing, playing the piano for a few minutes, watching your kids laugh because you took an extra 10 minutes to go run in the rain with them. And play, to me, it always comes back to that, right? Like, play can seem like this frivolous, useless activity, particularly when you talk about this in the business world. But play is one of the most vital things. It's one of the ways that our brains learn best. It's how we develop strong relationships, resilience, reframing. A book called Play by Dr. Stuart Brown is one of my favorites. And I think that's why I'm so glad you brought all that up, is like sometimes these things we might think that we should be doing something else, but really we're already doing everything that matters to us.
And Jocelyn, I want to explore this deathbed you concept a little bit deeper. But before we do that, I want to throw to a quick little message from our sponsor, Wix. If you want to sell online, you got to stand out. So go to Wix e-commerce and create an online store that will absolutely grab your shopper's attention. You can build a state-of-the-art storefront, showcase your product with striking product pages, and even sell subscriptions. With Wix e-commerce, you can go global and display prices in local currencies. You can even boost your sales by offering instant coupons using the live chat. Now you can streamline your checkout process with automated shipping fees and sales tax calculation. You can even manage your inventory and track your sales from one convenient dashboard while you analyze your comprehensive sales and traffic reports. So check out these and more must-have e-commerce features for sellers just like you who absolutely mean business. Go to wix.com/e-commerce today and join over 700,000 active stores selling worldwide with Wix e-commerce. Welcome back to today's show with Jocelyn Brady, brain and story coach and host of Tiny Tips for Your Brain on YouTube. You got to check it out. So Jocelyn, thanks for being here. So, deathbed you. Now, when you first introduced that to us, my first thought was, what are your deathbed you inspirations? You know, when you find yourself in your last moments, what do you want to look back on? And maybe how have they changed as you have grown from a brander to a storyteller to really understanding the neuroscience of all this?
That's, I don't think anyone has done this exercise to me. Thank you. If I try to do it to myself, but it's always helpful to have an outsider do it. The first thing that comes to mind is I hope you found a way to laugh and bring levity and connection to yourself and people around you. And then on a more, I guess, shall we say, tangible level, I'm working on my first book, and I would like to finish that this year. It's tentatively titled "Your Brain is a Magical Asshat" because it makes me laugh. That's how I make a lot of decisions.
Wait a minute. Well, you said ass hat?
Yes, I did.
Explain that for us.
Again, because it makes me laugh. So I think it's the brain is so fascinating. It's keeping you alive. It's doing all of these things you're not aware of, right? It's processing these millions of bits of information, and we're only aware of a tiny sliver of them. It's respiring, it's breathing, it's thinking thoughts, it's telling stories, and it's also allowing you to communicate with other people. It is keeping you alive, but it also can stop you from doing the things that make you feel most alive. So it's this really great irony of, antithesis. This like these clashing forces where it's helping you not die, but at what cost? So we get into rhythms. We have all these negativity bias. We want to stay comfortable. We want to, again, not die. But that means when we face something new, it feels so scary, and our brain can't really distinguish between, if something feels scary because you think people are going to laugh at you, that can feel the same as being ousted from the tribe and facing certain death. So that's why I think of it as this magical asshat. It's wonderful and beautiful. And man, it could be just awful because it can hold you back depending on the types of brain stories that we decide to believe in and pursue and follow. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
And do you find that we definitely default to the more negative brain stories?
I mean, yeah, I think that's been pretty well established in neuroscience. I will say this about neuroscience, though, that we should always allow the flexibility and possibility for new stories there, and allow things to change and our own perceptions and awareness. And the more we discover, the more we realize we don't really know anything. And but that said, I think the negativity bias is a pretty known phenomena because that's what helped us, again, not die. Your previous guest again brought this up. If you have a hangry saber tooth coming after you, it's good that you run, hide, or fight. But it's so much stronger. It's, this giant force. If you think of toward and away something, you're moving towards something because you're open and receptive. You're in this really collaborative, probably playful, quote unquote, positive mindset versus away. No, I'm hunkering down. No one touch my things. Don't look at me. I'm hoarding all of these apples. And if you think of these two dynamic forces, the away one is so much stronger because it feels like protection and survival. But it's often just an illusion. It's false.
Fascinating. So, final question, Jocelyn. What is one thing our listeners could do right now to, recognize a brain story and do something about it? And I should say, recognize a brain story that is not in service to them at the moment and do something about it.
Yeah, the good signs of these brain stories that aren't of service to you, or do you feel nasty? Are you lashing out? Are you thinking negatively about yourself or other people? if you start judging others, the poison of going on to too much social media and scrolling, for example, can elicit some of these feelings. And that is usually a sign that there's an underlying story that you are not paying enough attention to. Where attention goes, energy goes. And if you are framing these things if you're looking at it as, do I see something negative and I'm judging it and feeling pretty harshly about it? What is that doing? It's causing a shutdown. How else can I see this? How can I play with these thoughts? And that would be my number one thing. How can you play with thoughts that feel constraining?
Awesome. How can people learn more about you?
JocelynBrady.com, Jocelyn Brady on LinkedIn, Jostle Them on YouTube and Instagram. And then you can also always check out my free tool at betterbrainstories.com.
And that's plural, betterbrainstories.com, correct?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for tootling around in my head. I don't know how you're going to shake that out, but I appreciate you working with me on that.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you.
Hey, and thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what Jocelyn had to share, then by all means, share this episode with friends, family, colleagues, anybody you think that may be telling themselves a negative brain story or brain stories that simply are not in service to them. Feel free to share this episode. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. You know what to do there. I've got all kinds of free tools, tips, techniques, and talent there, like Jocelyn, that are sharing, will help you share stories and craft those compelling little narratives that can really make a huge difference in your life. And don't forget about our ABTs of Selling course at businessofstory.thinkific.com. It will take everything that I've learned from the hero's journey to the 10-step story cycle system, right down to the 3-act structure of setup, problem, resolution, and the and button. Therefore, something that you can do in just 3 steps. It's where I have found that all great storytelling begins. And when you do that, then apply Jocelyn's template. I really like that idea of the story template. Let's see, I've got it right. Setup, twist, obstacles you have to overcome. It's pretty much where the universe is punching you in the nose, really trying to determine how badly do you want it. Your resolution, are you resolved to make this happen? And what is then the outcome of that leads to that yay moment? I get that right, Jocelyn? I think I hit them all right.
That's right. And the yay is important to say, yay, you learned something. And that's one of the major things that come out of a great story is you've changed and you've learned something new.
Isn't a story really just the ultimate learning tool that we use? I mean, that's what it ultimately comes down to.
Absolutely. Yes. It's all stories.
It's all stories. And with that, I will leave you with something that I hope Jocelyn will appreciate. And that is, the ending, that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself, the brain story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.